Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to show you my Jobava London System repertoire, an absolutely wonderful opening, which is very rare, extremely aggressive, has very straightforward attacking ideas behind it, and we're going to have a look at the most common setups Black could play. We're going to cover everything Black could play. You cannot really divide the Jobava London into, theoretical variations like you would with the Roy Lopez or the Caro Kann or the French or the King's Indian, because it's a setup opening for white and Black gets to choose a setup against it. So what you can see on the screen are the most common setups Black could play, the 7 most common ones. And absolutely everything Black could go for is going to fall into one of these. Before we start, we're going to have a look at a game played by Bahadur Jobava. First of all, the entire Jobava London repertoire is available on Nocti. Follow the link in the description. Instead of going over a bunch of theoretical lines, the easiest way to learn an opening is to practice it against a sparring partner. If you have a human who's willing to practice against you, that's great. If you don't, try out Nocti. Nocti is a human-like AI that's going to, play normal moves, unlike the engine. So as you can see here, I have 100 probably repertoires created on Nocti, and what I do is I practice my openings. Instead of learning variations, I play them out. So what you can do here, select play the opening, choose Nocti's strength, choose which side you'd like to play, and just start playing. And Nocti is going to play like a human, try to trick you like a human, and just, challenge you. The repertoire is also available on my Patreon page, along with a bunch of other repertoires. You can purchase it separately, or if you'd like to support the channel, you can become a member for $4 a month and gain access to 1E4, 1D4, French, Caro Kann, Sicilian, Vienna, whatever else, and about 500 other posts. So follow the link to the repertoire below if you'd like to get a PGN version, and if you'd like to practice it against Nocti, follow the link to Nocti. You will gain access to the Jobava repertoire, and I personally think that will be the easiest way to study the opening. If you decide to go premium on Nocti, although you can do many things without going premium, use the code Hanging Pawns to get a massive 64% discount. Let's go back to the Jobava. First of all, the opening was played after him, named after him. He's the one who introduced it in serious tournament play, although, it has been played before him by lesser players. So first of all, the Jobava London starts with d4. Black can play d5 or knight f6, and of course they could also go g6 or c5, but we're going to go into one of those setups. In this game, Jobava was playing Savchenko 10 years ago. The next move White makes is knight c3, almost always, and that's what Jobava plays. You can also start with bishop f4, but that's the London system. The Jobava London is knight c3, and Savchenko plays d5. The reason Black plays d5 is to prevent e4. And if Black plays, g6 or d6, it's absolutely principled to continue with e4. So what I tried to do here, as a part of this Jobava London repertoire, I didn't play e4, and I didn't recommend that you play e4 if Black plays g6 or d6 or whatever else. However, as a disclaimer, if Black doesn't play d5, someone's calling me. If Black doesn't play d5, you should play e4 and go into a Pirc or the modern. If you don't want to learn Pirc and modern theory, then don't play e4. In any case, d5 played by Savchenko, which is going to be, 99% of the games. Either Black starts with d5 or Black plays d5 after knight c3. And the third move is bishop f4. Now, what does White play for here? I'm going to give you a bit of a strategic introduction to the Jobava London before I go into the actual repertoire. You can find all the variations below. I'm going to try to make this instructive, and instead of going over theory, I'm going to talk about ideas. So, these two pieces do two things. First of all, they enable White to castle queenside quickly. Once White moves the queen away, white can castle queenside. So immediately we can see that this is a very sharp, very aggressive opening where white doesn't delay castling queenside, doesn't bother with the c-pawn breaking black center. The second thing they do, they put pressure on c7. So one of the most common attacking themes in the Jobava London is to move knight b5, putting pressure on c7. In fact, if black isn't careful, if black doesn't play a6 straight away, well, then knight b5 is definitely an option. So that's one thing. So in this game, Savchenko played a6. e3, that's the fourth part of your setup. Next up, you're going to go queen d2 at some point, and you're going to continue with queenside castles. Now, what black normally does, and that's what we are going to be referring to as the main line, are setups with d5 and g6 and knight f6, with or without a6. In this case, that's what Savchenko did. He played g6. And there are several ways for white to play this position, but the immediate g6 is fairly easy to punish. e3 opens up our queen. Our bishop is going to come to d3 or to e2, and our knight wants to land on e5. So we want to put pressure on black as early as possible. But Jobava, being a very aggressive player, played h4 straight away. So this is what I chose for a model game I would like to show you, because it's absolutely typical for the Jobava London. One downside I want to mention, one typical downside, and something you constantly have to watch out for, is the fact that your c-pawn is blocked. That means two things. Firstly, you can never support d4 with c3. So when black inevitably plays c5, breaking down your center, you don't have enough support. Secondly, you can never play c4, breaking down black's center. So as soon as you go knight c3, you can know two things. Your center can be undermined, black's center can never be undermined. So playing knight c3, if a beginner plays it, it's a bad move, because they probably don't understand the implications and the consequences of not being able to crush your opponent's center and leaving your own center vulnerable. If a good player plays it, he knows the downsides and he's ready to compensate for them with moves like h4. The game continues bishop g7, h5, immediately breaking down the structure. Of course, at this point, playing castles would be, absurd. You castle, I open up the h file, and, for example, castles, takes, and now we're moving in. A couple moves till complete destruction. I'm going to misplace this knight, and I'm going to mate you. But of course, this is a pawn sacrifice. He takes, and Jobava immediately snaps the knight off. Rook takes, pawn takes, queen takes, c6. Now we can see what the Jobava is all about. All the pieces are coming in, and Jobava continues knight f3 and castles queenside. The fact that he has given up an exchange matters very, very little here. What are these rooks doing? They aren't doing anything, and they won't be doing anything for a long while. Knight d7, queen h2, putting pressure on c7, threatening to trap the queen. Bishop c7 wins the game, so knight f8, bishop c7 anyway, queen d7, and now bishop e2. Slow development. Bishop e6, bishop e5. He wants to trade off black's arguably only useful piece. b5, rook h1. I'm going to show you how the game ended, sort of. Queen f5 by black, bishop f4, a5, knight c5. Look at these squares. Look at f3 or f4 and g4 coming up. g4 is coming up straight away. Queen h7, g4. What he wants to do is f4, g5, break down the structure, win the game. If I play f4 and g5 as white, that's going to be it. He plays, queen g6, bishop c7, b4, moves the knight away, and he's ready for f4 now. And f4. From here on, it's really already losing. It doesn't really matter that white has given up the exchange where all of white's pieces are working together. The knight moves away, of course g5, sacrifices the bishop. It doesn't really matter, the bishop on d6 wasn't doing anything. And now bishop h5. Where do you move your queen? Queen f5 or queen h7 were the only squares. Gh6. You cannot really afford to move this bishop because the rook is hanging on e8 as well. So rook e7, hg7, rook g7, fe5, and from here on the game ended very quickly. Knight takes c8, knight takes c8, bishop g6 attacking the queen. If you take with the rook, I'm going to infiltrate on h8 and h7. If you take with the queen, which is what he did, queen h8 check, king f7 only move, rook f1 was the end of the game. That's it, you only have one square and then it's going to be mate. So I wanted to show you this one game before we go into the setups, just to highlight how dangerous this system is. So you're basically fighting for two things: c7 and the kingside attack by opening up all of your pieces. And as I said, this main setup with knight f6 and g6 and d5 is going to happen 90% of the time. Okay, now let's get into that. So d4, knight f6, knight c3, g6, bishop f4, d5, e3, bishop g7. This is what most people play. If after d5 you play knight b5 too early, which we're not going to do, black can play knight a6, and after, e3, black is going to chase this knight away, and the knight's going to come back to c3. So I don't really think playing knight b5 is that valuable in g6, d5 setups, because the knight comes back to c7 and everything's fine. We've sort of wasted time. So let us delete this line. However, in other setups where black plays with e6, we are going to go knight b5, just not in this one. So e3 here, bishop g7. Here, we're going to do exactly what Jobava did. Our repertoire is going to be h4. I have included a ton of theory and a ton of games, and you can learn from games such as this one played by Jobava. Now, the most common way to try and refute this, because if you turn on the engine, it's all zeros, black is perfectly fine, is to play h5. And I think that's the best move. If black doesn't play h5, well, they could try to play bishop g4, which also prevents h5 by gaining a tempo on the queen. So if bishop g4, for example, there were no games played from here, we can play f3 and we gain a tempo. The bishop moves back, and now we can continue with g4, h5. So bishop g4 doesn't really address the issue. The only thing that prevents h5 is h5. Castles, of course, would be absolutely devastating. h5. There were a couple of games played from here, about 50 games, but white wins a vast majority of these games. So most people are going to play h5. And after h5, we continue with knight f3. There's no need to rush. Bishop g4, black could also have castled. Queen d2 unpinning. And most people here are going to take on f3, which seems crazy to me, but you don't really want to allow knight e5 now that the knight is unpinned, because then the bishop would move and then f3, g4 would come anyway. Our only goal here is to castle queenside and break through on the king side. It's not really possible for the black king to go anywhere else. Anyway, so bishop takes f3, gf3, c6, castles queenside, knight bd7. You could say that this is the start of the game. Black also could have castled instead of knight to d7. And now our positional goal from the beginning of the game was to play e4. I know that we couldn't play it straight away because black played d5, but now that we've castled queenside, we want to play e4, we want to expand in the center. So as soon as they take on f3, which is commonly going to happen after bishop g4, e4 is sufficiently supported. So now e4, e6, rook g1, for example. There are other moves. From here, there was only one game in which Regaisi beat MVL. MVL went knight b6. It wasn't the best move. It was better to go b5 and continue with an immediate queenside counterattack. It's of course not possible for the black king to hide anywhere anymore, so may as well play b5. But in any case, this is what we are trying to do. We finish our setup with bishop f4 and knight c3 and e3, and then we play h4. If they play h5, we switch plans. We play queen d2, we castle queenside, we play knight f3, we want to play knight e5, If they play bishop g4, we allow them to take, we unpin, and if they don't take, we go knight e5. If they do take, we then play for e4. So this is the most common setup, and this is the absolutely perfect antidote to that setup, the way Jobava plays it. The second setup is a Benoni of a sort, because there is a knight on c3. And this is going to be the only setup where you don't actually play the Jobava London system. Unfortunately, there really is no way to avoid that properly unless you're willing to compromise. So after knight f6, knight c3, what if black plays c3 straight away? Well, you have two options. You can either play e3, and hope that black takes on d4, in which case you would recapture with the e pawn and then play bishop f4. However, what if black doesn't take on d4? Then your bishop is trapped on c1 and you're not playing the Jobava. So what I recommend doing here is going for a Benoni. There's simply nothing better. Now we have transposed to a very, very theoretical line, which I guess you could call it the reverse Chigorin, where black is just going to play a normal Benoni, white's going to play a normal Benoni, but in the normal Benoni, this pawn is on c4. Now, there's a downside to not having a pawn on c4. Of course, b5 is easier to play. So if you don't know the ideas in the normal Benoni, I think that's actually a good idea, because it's very different. One of the main ideas for black in the main line modern Benoni, let's say, is to play b5. Now white's knight is on c3, so it's not the same thing at all. I'm going to show you what to do here. So they go g6, and there are a couple of moves here. Knight f3 is the most common one. You can also go f4 or bishop e2 or even h3. What you don't want to do is allow a trade of your f3 knight for the bishop on c8. So people usually preface knight f3 with h3, or they play knight f3 and they allow bishop g4. But we're going to do something very drastic. One of black's main strategic goals in the Benoni is to trade this bishop off, which may sound strange because you could argue that it's their good bishop, but it's really not. This is the bishop they're playing for, and we're going to invite them to do exactly that. Why? Because this is our bad bishop. So what we're going to do here, we're going to play bishop b5 check. And after bishop d7, knight fd7 is also possible, of course. After bishop d7, we're going to play a4. If they take, they are never playing b5. So, bishop takes, we take with the pawn, of course. And our rook is active, everything is perfect. So after a4, black is just going to continue developing. Now we go knight f3, because black cannot play bishop g4, trading off the bishop for the knight. Let me explain why this knight is absolutely essential. What white's trying to do here is white's trying to play e5. And if this knight gets traded off, white's not going to play e5. Let me give you an example. Let's say black is allowed to take. Black plays knight d7, we castle, black castles, and black plays knight e5. How do we challenge that knight? We have to play e5, or we have to play f4. But then we completely give away d4, and everything is insecure. So it's very, very, very important not to allow black to trade off this knight, because we want to play for e5. We're going to castle, we're going to go rook e1, we want to play e5. So castles, knight d2. This knight can also transfer to c4, controlling e5 from the other side of the board. Although that's not absolutely essential, I like this move the most. It's a very rare move. You can also castle or go h3. Now that this bishop is no longer pinned, h3 is a very useful move, and you either have to, in my opinion, play h3 or castle, or play knight d2, depending on your preference. So I've actually included several different plans here, and I would like you to choose at this point. Personally, I prefer knight d2, just never allowing the trade in the first place. Most commonly people take on b5, knight bd7, queen e2, e6, and black has to start breaking down the center. f6, castles, and now the plans have changed. So knight d2 allows us to play for rook d1 and putting pressure on d6. Alternatively, as I said, if you don't go knight d2, I would recommend the move h3 and playing for a normal Benoni setup where we castle kingside, play rook e1, and play for e5. So if they play c5 straight away, you're going into a Benoni. Now, let's move on to the next setup. The setup with d5 and c5 is very specific. And we're going to divide it into two different ideas for black. In one of them, they play a6, in the other, they don't. And a6, as we know, is important because of knight b5. So, first of all, if they don't play a6, what are the consequences of that? If they start with e6, we are going to play the move knight b5. Okay, and as soon as they play e6, we go knight b5. The reason is we don't want to allow any counterplay with this bishop later on, and it's very useful to have that bishop stuck behind the pawn chain, and then our knight can go parading on the queen side. So when we play knight b5, they have to defend c7, so knight a6 is forced. We go e3, they go bishop e7, we go knight f3, and they castle. Very, very simple setup. They're going to go c6, chase the knight away, and then c5. They can also start with c5 straight away. Now, I don't like playing knight b5 immediately after c5 because, of course, there is queen a5 check, and the knight is attacked, just has to go back. We haven't played e3 yet. So against this, we play e3. And of course, in this position, black doesn't really want to allow knight b5, so most people are going to go cd4, exchanging pawns, which I think is a very good idea because it leaves white with a very awkward pawn structure. However, if they do go e6, we now go knight b5. And now, of course, queen check, that doesn't really do anything. So knight a6, and from here there are many moves, but let's say c3, bishop e7, a4, and this knight, if chased away, is going to go to a3. We have consolidated our center, and you could say that we've transposed to a normal London system. Still, the knight cannot be chased away, not just yet, at least, because this knight is preventing the pawn from coming to a6, and the c-pawn is already on c5. And that's why I like knight b5 in this position. No counterplay, the knight cannot be chased away, and we are still in full control over c7. You can see that the knight on a6 cannot even move away. So a more promising way to continue for white, in my opinion, is to, if they go knight f6, c5, without a6, is to exchange on d4. And this is, you could say, the main line. At this point, they do play a6. Again, it's very important to play a6 here, because if they don't, we play knight b5. Say they play, I don't know, e6. Then knight b5, knight a6, and c3. And next we're going to go a4. The knight once again cannot be chased away, and we're even controlling d6. So once they exchange on d4, they go a6. And now it's just a normal position where for some reason we have a Carlsbad structure, and this knight, instead of being on d2 where it belongs, is on c3. So in my opinion, this is one of the worst cases you could get in the Jobava. It's still playable, the engine says equal. So we just continue developing. Knight f3, bishop g4. There are other moves like knight c6. You can find all of them in the repertoire. Bishop e2, e6, h3, bishop takes, knight c6, knight e2. The most important thing is move this knight away and be ready to play c3. You are now in the normal Carlsbad structure. You get this from the exchange QGD, you get this from the Caro-Kann. Normally, this bishop would be on d3, not on f3, but what can you do? If you want more strategic advice concerning this specific structure, watch my video on the Carlsbad, watch my video on the minority attack, and you could watch the videos on the exchange Caro-Kann and the exchange Queen's Gambit declined. So most likely, if black plays d5 and c5 without a6, you're going to get a weird Carlsbad where your job is to move the knight away, play c3, and play for the e5 square. Okay, now d5, c5 with a6. A way more exciting story, because we're going to go crazy again. So d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6, bishop f4, a6. Okay, we play e3, fine, we don't have, knight b5 or anything. And at this point, this is how I play with black. so I can tell you a lot from my own personal experience. Black wants to play e6 here quickly to challenge the f4 bishop and castle. However, Black also wants to play c5, and c5 is the most important move here. If you play it without e6, you're sacrificing a pawn. And I've played both. Once again, when I played c5, I was really struggling to regain that pawn. e6, knight a4, and you're not getting that pawn back, unfortunately, unless you're willing to give up your bishop. So bishop c5, knight c5, queen a5 check, which is not something I like. I don't want to give away this bishop. So if Black plays this way, if they want to take the pawn back, because we're going to go b4, they have to take straight away, and they have to go in for this line, which I think is dreadful for Black. Playing this without a dark squared bishop seems awful to me. Again, I've played it with Black. I know it's very bad for Black. So e6 first is the most common type of setup. And this is, you could say, the slow Jobava. And the first time I had this with white, and I've had it with Black multiple times, I was playing Tihana Ivekovic, a woman's, I think she's a FIDE master, sorry Tihana. We were playing in the Rabat Open, I'm gonna miss the year, 3 or 4 years ago. I had white here, she played the setup, we drew the game, it was a very boring game. She told me after the game, oh, I was lucky, Leon prepared me for this a few months ago. Leon Levajic is a Croatian GM, a friend of ours, very strong, 2600 almost now. And he showed her this slow setup, and I absolutely had no counterplay throughout the game. So this is the way for Black to kill the game. Unfortunately, there's nothing you can do about it. The upside, though, is that this bishop is going to be bad, and that we have a slightly weird line, which is very risky, but the best according to the engine, we can continue with, and that's g4. That's not what I played against Tihana. I played normal moves, but this is what I think you should do. At this point, Black can go bishop to b4 or c5. I think c5 is the critical line. Everything is in the repertoire, once again. If they play c5, we go g5. They move the knight back. The knight cannot go to h5 because we take it. Knight fd7 and now knight f3. And what we're trying to do here, we're trying to compensate for our weird center by discouraging Black from castling kingside. And at this point, neither king is going to be safe anywhere on the board. However, Black has this bishop. So something like, say, knight c6, a3, b5, h4, maybe bishop b7, h5. Who would you rather be here? The engine prefers white. Most humans are going to prefer white because, again, there's this bishop on b7. Black has no bad pieces. In fact, this bishop could, come to c4 eventually. It could come to h3. It could come to g2. It could come to d3. A very flexible piece. Very importantly, this bishop could trade itself off if the knight comes into the only weakness in our position, c4. You snap that right off. So spicing up the slow Jobava system with g4 is what I recommend in the repertoire. Next up, another slow setup where Black plays e6, bishop e7. Again, we know the rule. If they play e6 without a6, we go knight b5. And this is one of my favorites. However, the pawn isn't on c5 yet. The pawn is on c7, so our knight is going to get chased away. I still believe that forcing this knight to a6 is a good idea. So e3, bishop e7. Black also could have gone c6 straight away, but I still can at some point. We continue with knight f3. Again, they can go c6. Whenever they go c6, we go knight c3. But until they do, keep the knight there. Castles and h4. Whether they've played c6 or not matters very little. Our goal is to push on the king side. And Black's counterplay is going to be c5. Again, they could have chosen to play c6 earlier. You're going to find probably 10 example games in the repertoire with c6. So c5, c3, bishop d7, a4. This is how we respond to c5. We go c3, and we're ready to move the knight back to c2 if needed. cd4, ed4, knight e4. Okay. What we want to do now is somehow bring all of our pieces into play on the king side. So moves like queen c1, moves like bishop d3, moves like knight g5. You want to put pressure on h7. You want to keep pushing your king side pawns. Maybe knight e5 instead of knight g5. The point is, we have one more active piece than black. You could argue two, but both knights are sort of offside. And we have a lot of king side pressure because we're controlling the e5 square, and f6 is a very weakening move because it creates a hook for our g-pawn. So this is what we do against e6, bishop e7, a very slow setup that isn't challenging at all. Next up, we're going to have a look at bishop f5. Bishop f5 is a very provocative move that people often play. In many other move orders, we're going to exploit it the same way, because we never play knight f3 early on. So whenever black plays bishop f5 early, it could be here or on the next move, we go f3. And disregard everything you know about the Jobava London system. You're not going to play it, you're going to play f3, e4. So let's say e6, e4, the bishop has to move back, and now instead of playing bishop f4, we play bishop e3, and we are playing a sort of Pirc setup, English attack type of setup that you get in the Sicilian, the Pirc, the Petrov, whatever. And we're not having a bishop on f4 because we want to support our center, we want to keep things solid, and we want to attack on the king side. And I think this is one of the most natural attacking setups we have in the repertoire. Black can play many different things, but let's assume bishop b4. We are just going to ignore that. The bishop on g6 can be trapped. So, h4. Black immediately has to respond. If they take on c3, we don't really care. It doesn't really matter. So h6, let's say, h5, bishop h7, e5. Look at our pieces. The queen's coming to d2, the pawn is rolling to g4, and then f4, and then g5, and if black ever castles kingside, this is absolutely crushing from a human perspective. The engine says equal, but the engine says everything is equal if you play the Jobava London because it's not the main line opening. Finally, we have the King's Indian setup, which no one ever plays. However, one person played it against me. All you have to know is that if black, excuse me, I may sneeze, if black doesn't play d5 and instead they build their normal King's Indian type of setup, that's just perfect. This is like waving a red flag to a bull. Again, the engine says equal, but we know what to do. We go h4. They can play h6 or h5. We go queen d2, we castle queenside, and now we go d5. d5 is a very important move for two reasons. It gives our knight the d4 square, which helps us influence e6 and f5, but it also misplaces the c6 knight, which doesn't have to be here, but most likely it will. And if the knight has to move away, it's going to block in the bishop. So most people don't really move the knight back here. They could go knight e5, but people play e5. So this is what we are playing for. We advance with d5, we misplace that knight, and basically, let's say knight a7, I think that's the best move according to the engine. What does black do here? You don't want to castle kingside. It takes you too many moves to castle queenside, and we can do whatever. We have knight f3, knight d4, at least two very natural moves. So playing against the King's Indian is almost never going to happen, but I had to show it to you. One more thing I would briefly like to mention is if black plays f5, you cannot play the Jobava. I mean, you can start with knight c3, but then I would recommend that you play bishop g5, a normal opening, the FL, not, don't do anything weird. When you play d4 on f5, knight c3, you need to go bishop g5, not bishop f4, because bishop f4 makes no sense. d6, e5 is going to come. So if they play the Dutch, no Jobava. Okay, Let me know what you think. I hope you got something from the video. This is my personal Jobava repertoire. The last time I've played it was a couple of years ago, but I think it's a really efficient repertoire. Again, you can find it below. You can find the full PGN, and you can also practice it on Nocti, the best way to learn an opening. Thanks, stay tuned for more chess. See you tomorrow, bye-bye.